Hello viewers, and welcome to this week's edition of our program, The Business Brief. I'm your host, Alois Vinga, and this week we are blessed to be hosting the K International in Zimbabwe Country Director, Mr. Patrick Sikana. Welcome, Patrick.
Hello, Aloy, and hello, viewers.
So maybe to begin with, would you mind sharing just a brief background on what K International in Zimbabwe stands for, the work it does just in general?
Thank you. K International in Zimbabwe has been operating since 1992. We started operating here in response to a regional drought. So initially it was more focused on saving lives from that drought. But over the time, our solutions have evolved to saving lives, transforming lives and livelihoods, which means now our focus has evolved to a dual mandate. We still respond to emergencies, but now we also work towards eradicating poverty in a more development setting.
So we experienced disturbances due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and some of our viewers could have lost track of the work which you were undertaking then. Would you mind sharing any activities which K International in Zimbabwe was involved in during that period?
Absolutely, thank you. In Zimbabwe, we responded in three ways with three different projects to COVID-19. The first one was the Urban Resilience Program that we implemented in Masvingo and Marsh West. This was focusing on supporting households to undertake income-generating activities so that they can bounce back, having had their livelihoods disrupted by COVID-19. The second intervention was one where we responded to support markets. Again, it was also focusing on vendors, youth and women in urban areas to make sure that they got the support to return back to selling and trading as they had before COVID-19 hit. And the third element through which we responded was provision of market infrastructure, building of markets, rehabilitating some of the market infrastructure, but also resuscitating the supply chain for marketeers to have a place where they can trade and sell their produce.
Okay, so I note that you are now focusing also more on empowerment projects as opposed to just dispersing aid to these communities. What has prompted this shift where we see you participating in empowering communities through this kind of projects?
That's right. Our focus in terms of building empowerment, and actually we call it resilience, is because we have noted that in order to eradicate poverty, you've got to invest in long-term solutions rather than short-term gap filling. And so that has prompted, that's the rationale behind the evolution towards more empowerment, more long-term solutions.
So would you mind sharing with our viewers the total amount which was spent on these projects and also areas targeted where beneficiaries were drawn from?
So we targeted 1,000 households for the Masvingo and Norton Urban Resilience Program, which was the cash transfer. We targeted 1,400 households for the urban COVID-19 recovery program, which targeted Chibi and Zaka districts. And we targeted 5,000 households for the program that targeted urban markets, resuscitating urban markets in Mutare and Chipinge.
Okay, so how many people, just in general, maybe an estimate of the number of beneficiaries?
From those?
Yes, from these areas under this project.
So it's round about 22,000 for the support to COVID-19 early recovery program. We also had another 30,000 direct beneficiaries from the food security and supply chain restoration. So I would say roughly 60,000 people that we were able to reach with the recovery after COVID-19.
So in the past, the trend was that more aid and support would flow towards the rural direction, but we are now seeing your organization coming into urban areas. What is prompting these shifts?
Absolutely. We know and we have seen evidence that the structure of poverty is evolving in this country as it is in other countries. There are more women that are being pushed into poverty. There are more youths that are pushed into poverty, and there are more urban dwellers that are being pushed into poverty. And hence, we've understood that in order to deal with poverty, to eradicate poverty in a more systemic and complete way, we've got to follow where it is the deepest.
Okay, so what touched me when we kicked off this conversation is the fact that you began work in Zimbabwe in 1992 on the backdrop of a drought. But years later, decades later, the country is still being ravaged by these droughts. What do you think continues to cause this, and in the long term, what are your suggestions?
Indeed, we are facing here in Zimbabwe, as elsewhere in the world, the effects of climate change. And so what we have done in response to this as Care International is invest and focus on building resilience. How do we build resilience? We invest in climate smart agriculture, in simple water harvesting techniques, in setting up micro dams, for instance, so that we preserve water, in providing skills on how to sort of work in a drought-stricken area, but still be able to produce crops. So again, crop smart agriculture. We are supporting communities with setting up irrigation schemes so that they are able to harvest whatever they can for the most drought-stricken months of the year. We are basically investing in resilience building so that communities are able to slow down the impact of climate change. And when the shocks of climate change, such as floods, such as droughts, strike, that they can bounce back to their normal lives.
So in terms of implementation of your programs, what's the target ratio like comparing men, women and youths? Where is the priority for Care International in Zimbabwe?
That's right. As Care International, we focus on women and girls. But we do it in such a way that we involve men and boys. And recently we've had conversations with a number of government stakeholders and others. And it does seem that the desire in this country is that we should lift, continue to focus on women and girls, but do it at a family level, family as an entry point, as a level of action. So our focus is women and girls, but we address the interventions, we empower them as part of a household.
So what would be your comment in terms of continuity of these resilience projects which you are talking about? Maybe if you have done any postmortems or monitoring and evaluation of these projects, how if they managed to fare after you have pulled out?
I think that we have evidence on the ground that shows that there are three very important elements to building resilience. One is sequencing. So when you introduce perhaps poultry, a bit of goat rearing, a bit of cattle rearing, a bit of vegetable garden farming, different interventions that are properly sequenced and layered on each other and then integrated. So it's the layering, it's the sequencing, and it's the integration. If you do that, it means that if one aspect of the resilience building is affected, the community, the household, the family can fall back on the other element of resilience. And I want to say this, that if you are working in the development space in this country and you are not doing resilience building, then you are probably filling a gap.
Okay, 30 years. You've been operating in Zimbabwe for 30 years, and recently you commemorated your 30th anniversary. What were the reflections on that commemoration?
First of all, we've learned a lot of lessons in the past 30 years. One of those lessons is that we can't do it alone. We can only do it through partnerships with government, partnerships with private sector. There is no country that has eradicated poverty without working with the private sector. None. We have learned that lesson. We are reaching out to private sector actors, but more fundamentally, we are making sure that our interventions have the support and actually are grown out of communities where we work. Those are some of the key reflectors. The other element is once you have proved impact of a given solution, there has to be somebody who will do it at scale. Some of the things we do are a drop in the ocean. How do we make sure that that goes to more people, because the need out there is great? But also there has to be a payer at scale, somebody who is going to pay for the intervention at scale. And usually, if you have empowered the communities properly, they will be able to pay for some of the services. And in that case, that solution becomes sustainable.
So 30 years for me is also quite a very long time. Does it mean that the country is failing to pull out of these hardships, or it's just that there is need to continue working with Zimbabwe? I
think we must not lose hope. One day and one day soon, if we work together, we will keep building and keep improving. And I think there's been some improvements. Development is not a linear line. Sometimes you go up, sometimes you go down because of the shocks that come, whether they are economic shocks or they are climatic shocks, that sort of tend to take you down. But I think if we continue to build functional partnerships, we continue to invest in the right things, and to focus on things that really bring about improvement, such as education, such as building resilience, such as making sure there is gender equality. If we are emphasizing these key pressure points, we will eradicate poverty in the country.
So, look, this program is Business Brief. That's the title of the program. We should be discussing on the economy, but realizing that economies and development partners work hand in hand. Where the economy is struggling, we find the development partners coming in. Against this background, there have been quite a number of developments in our economy, trying to arrest inflation and so forth. How has this impacted your work as K International in Zimbabwe?
The inflation in the country has affected us, our work, as it has affected everyone else in terms of reduction in purchasing power and the rising cost of living. And sometimes you plan a certain amount of activities, but due to inflation, you've got to revise your targets downwards in order to be able to deliver within the budget that you have. I think that at the policy level, I believe government is working around the clock to arrest that situation. But for some of us who are from the development side, I still think that investing in long-term solutions that target both short-term and long-term. So sometimes you've got to save lives, come and fill in the gaps, but very quickly, rapidly go back into long-term solutions. Also, I think the role of private sector has probably not been enhanced enough in this country. in terms of poverty eradication or even in terms of building resilience. So bringing in more private actors, the business we are talking about, so that we can invest in growth. It is only when we have grown the pie that we can share it. We cannot share poverty. We can't share nothing.
Okay, Patrick, as we round off this program, what will be your final words to the policymakers and to Zimbabweans out there who are facing quite a number of challenges? I think according to the World Bank, our extreme poverty levels stand at 49%. What word of hope would you give to the viewers who are going through these challenges, as well as the policymakers?
I think to the viewers, to people that are going through this, particularly the communities that we work with in the 5 provinces in this country and elsewhere, I would say this is not the time to lose hope. This is the time to continue looking at how do we invest in the future while making sure that we are sustaining the current. How do we invest in partnerships that help us to improve the livelihoods that we are working with? For the government, I think it's how to continue creating an environment where both the private sector actors and the social development actors can continue to invest as partners, because we are partners to government. We are here on the behest of the government, and so for the government is continue to create the favorable environment for investments, and for people, I personally and from Care International, we think that communities have to continue to focus on long-term solutions, investing in education, building resilience at the community level, but also, challenging those structures that make lives for women, especially, and girls worse off.
Well, viewers, that was Patrick Sikana, Country Director, Care International in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much, Patrick, for your time.
Thank you so much, and thank you, viewers.
So for these and other programs, please do not hesitate to visit our platforms, our website www.newzimbabwe.com, our Twitter handle newzimbabwe.com, as well as our Facebook page newzimbabwe.com. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your viewing.